Hello, and welcome to the Pleasantville Garden Club program. I'm GG Kopilak, and our guest today is Charles King Sadler. He is a certified arborist and a landscape designer. Welcome, Charles. I'm very happy that you've come today.
Thank you.
We've had you at the Garden Club doing a presentation. It was very interesting, and we wanted to share you with everyone on the television. But tell us, right away, I guess we could start with why you think it's important to have a landscape designer or a certified arborist versus us doing our own work?
Good question. By visiting many properties, sometimes it's hundreds of properties in a season. So I think I have the benefit, and then of having formal training and continuing education. So I have such a breadth of knowledge, and then when I don't know, I have a whole team of colleagues that I can follow up with.
So we're making a lot of mistakes, basically. You think?
That's what I'm trying to say nicely, right?
You're trying to be nice about it, but yeah. So then you find that you can go in and start doing work and change a whole landscape, can you? Or
right. Well,
yes.
I think the perception is that, boy, it's going to be expensive. Someone that's. But there's so many ways, like where there's the Ford, the Chevrolet, and the Cadillac.
Okay.
So there's some folks I would do a full plan, and then there'd be implementation and maintenance.
So you go back and back to visit people afterwards. I think that was very impressive.
But then for some customers, it might just be one consultation. I might just spend 1 hour with them, and that might be their budget, and then they would do it on their own, or they might have their weekly care person, the person that mows the lawn.
Right.
So I could give them good information, good websites.
Right, right.
And then other people.
And then in the end, would you say that you're saving people money? Because I know for myself, I bought some plants for a site that just don't work.
Right, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Like the old adage in the landscape and gardening is the right plant in the right place.
Right.
So it's a bit like human resources. Each person has the right role that they perform the best in.
Right.
So that's really the art of knowing the site, the soil, the sun.
Do you have certain plants, though, that you prefer when you, for this region, let's say?
Yeah, certainly. There's plants that, because deer are so prevalent in Westchester, so boxwood are deer tolerant, so we never say deer resistant.
No.
Plants that the deer stay away from. But then there's problems with plants being overused, then there's more likely to have disease. So having a variety of plants, that's really what I get from the seminars that I go to, that diversity is the key. Right. So ornamental grasses are also deer tolerant, boxwood, and then also having plants that can be taller. So like a hydrangea tree, the deer might eat, but it's going to be out of their reach.
Oh, interesting. The tree rather than the bush, in other words, you're saying that.
Right, so I use that a lot. So there's still color, there's tricks. We're having, if there's, let's say, a pool area, that could be fenced in. You can have roses there. Yeah. And the rest of the property, there's plants. Maybe not as exciting, but plants the deer don't.
Do you have an instance that you could tell us about of one landscaping that you did that really changed everything? Or?
Sure. Let's see. There's an example. There's a house in our Reading, Connecticut, I remember. It was planted beautifully, but it had just been neglected. Okay. So I remember we visited, and so that's maybe one of my strengths, that I can see, even if it's completely overgrown, I can see the beauty. And so there was a crabapple tree that was a big tangle where you couldn't even see the garage, it was so big. And then there was an oak leaf hydrangea. And so just by spending about a day and a few truckloads, everything came back into order.
When you say a few truckloads of dirt and things to put down, you mean, or new plants? It
was a few truckloads of debris.
You took them away.
So much.
Oh, wow.
And so people were quite happy because it was inexpensive compared to replanting. Everything that was there made sense. It just had been neglected. Okay,
so you're bringing up a good subject that I would like to talk about today, and that's pruning. And do you feel that if they had been pruning it all along, that would not have been necessary? Is that
right? Correct.
Yeah. Can you save a tree that's gone too far?
There are some that respond well to that. Like I just visited a new customer in Hastings, and they had the gardener was pruning the dogwoods very hard, which you would pretty much never want to prune a dogwood tree unless.
Never want to prune a dogwood tree?
Unless there's a broken branch, or if if it's touching the house, but
Okay.
more or less it's like quite a graceful shape.
Right.
So if it's planted in the right place, it should be on its own, really.
Okay, so is that true for most flowering trees? You shouldn't touch them?
Well, cherry trees, some of the fruiting trees, even if it's an ornamental fruiting tree, they grow so quickly. So some of those, you could do what's called structural pruning, where
Okay.
you would thin it so the overall shape is more or less the same. But if there's several branches, you might remove a third of them. So there's a
Okay.
little more air circulation. And when there's a
Right.
big snowstorm, it doesn't break.
Right, right. So is there a rule for pruning, like back to a certain point?
Oh, right. That's a very good point. So in this particular house, this poor dogwood tree, they had just been butchered, and so there were lots of stumps. So
Okay.
more or less.
When you say stumps, you mean coming out of the branch?
Right. So instead of pruning where there's a juncture, there's what's called a branch collar.
Okay.
So like a priest collar.
Okay.
So where a branch comes back to the limb,
Right.
the tree is slightly swollen.
Okay.
If you look very carefully.
Right, right.
So you want to prune back to that. And so,
Not close to the trunk.
right. So sometimes it could be quite close. Other times it's an inch or 2 inches or 3 inches. But it's more or less, you don't want to leave a stump because that's an area. It'll take the plant longer to heal, and then it's an area where disease and insects can enter.
Interesting. Okay.
And so each plant is a little different where that branch collar is.
What about this year? Because it was so warm, and then we had a frost. So some of the flowers, well, even the flowers on the fruit trees, even I think some of them got brown and ruined. What do you think what's going to happen with them? Will the fruit still come, or do you think, or?
Well, let's see. There were the magnolia trees. I remember what you saw all over the county were this rust brown.
Oh, yeah, all of a sudden.
When I first saw it, I thought it almost looked like a Japanese maple leaf in the fall. I thought, what is that? And then I had to remember. I had to park and see what it was.
Right.
So with some of the plants, like the crab apples, I've seen crab apples where the flower was browned. Apple trees that I've seen, the flower was still intact, the ones that I've seen so far.
But will the fruit still come?
Well, in some cases, there might be no fruit or less fruit.
Okay. Should you do anything with those trees? Cut the flowers off, or does it just let it go by itself?
It more or less just let it go. With some of the plants like the hydrangeas,
Okay.
those have tender new growth, and so I'm seeing those tender new leaves were burned by the frost.
Right.
So that, and I've gotten calls about that.
Okay.
So what'll probably happen, it's better to wait and see, not to prune them, and then plants like the hydrangea, it may put out new leaves. So there'd be the old leaves, which would have been the only leaves for the season, and then the plant has a reserve.
Okay.
So hopefully it'll tap into that reserve. So let's say by the end of June, there will be secondary leaves.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So first of all, let's talk about hydrangeas a little, because I think there are two kinds. There's one with the old wood and there's one with new wood. Am I right?
Right.
Right. Could you explain that a little bit?
Right, for flowering purposes. So the traditional hydrangea people call mop head, or they often have very big blue
Right.
snowball-like
Okay,
or white.
okay.
So that variety, that's hydrangea macrophylla, which means big leaf.
It's a horrible name. Okay.
Right. It's pretty funny. Some of these Latin names.
Right.
So that more or less, it's setting its flower buds in the summer for the next year.
Okay, so it's already flowered in the spring.
Right.
It's setting its buds. The same thing with the rhododendron, am I right?
Right.
Right, okay. So so is that new wood or old wood?
So it's going to flower on old wood.
It's going to flower on old wood.
On the
that's considered.
previous year.
Okay, all right. So you don't cut that back in the spring, obviously. Or you do cut
If the
it.
plant is overgrown, then the rule, the U.S. National Arboretum has a great tutorial on hydrangea pruning.
Okay.
So you generally want to prune it. Ideally, you prune it right after it flowers, which means you're like
okay.
pruning off the flowers.
You prune them off, like the rhododendron, you rip them. Is that important to rip those flowers off the rhododendron? I never do it. I'll tell you right now.
Like in theory, the rhododendron will be tricked, because like on one budding area, it's going to flower once, and then the next year it'll take a year off.
Oh,
so
okay.
if
so
you
it's
break,
biannual then.
if you break off the previous year, it's going to trick the plant to think, oh, I didn't flower last year.
Oh, that's so cool.
So like at the
you
Cornell,
can trick a plant.
That's
I just
right.
learned something. Wow. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So now let's go back to the hydrangea, because I know people have asked about this. They're concerned. They don't know what to do with. Do you cut it back? Don't you cut it back? Do you leave it tall? Do you not leave it tall? So all right. So we've decided that on old wood, you take the flower off right away.
Well, it's a little counterintuitive. So you're going to more or less have to lose flowers if you're going to prune.
Okay.
So you could either prune them right after it flowers. That's in July, where the flowers still look nice.
Okay.
You could prune it back.
Okay.
So you don't want to prune the whole plant, maybe 1/3.
Okay.
So if the shape is like this, there'd be pockets where you would prune it back 6 inches, 12 inches.
Okay. Okay.
Well, the other option, you could prune it in the spring. And so you could prune up to 1/3.
Before it flowers.
Right, so then you'll probably lose 1/3 of the flowers.
Okay.
And if you did that every year, so let's say it's overgrown, like 5 years went by and it's 6 feet tall,
right,
and it's covering your windowsill, which you often see. Maybe you only want it to be 4 feet or 5 feet.
Right.
So then each year you could prune up to 1/3 of it, and then gradually you would reduce the height.
Okay. So now that was the old wood. Now let's talk about the one. Describe, please, for me, new wood.
So the new wood would be, again, we're going to use the long, funny Latin names. That's hydrangea paniculata.
Oh, it's a much nicer name
than
the other one.
That's a little more, a little more romance in that.
Yeah, a little romance. Okay.
So
a little flowery.
So a panicle, or it means like a cone-like flower.
Oh, okay.
So ones that are popular now is limelight hydrangea.
But now I'm not talking about the tree, the hydrangea tree.
Well, that gets confusing. A hydrangea tree.
Well, don't let me confuse it now. It's just I want to just say it's not about the tree right now.
Right.
So this is still the shrub.
Right, the shrub.
Okay.
Which actually, those two behave the same.
Okay.
So a hydrangea tree is just a shrub that a nursery person trained into a single trunk.
Okay, interesting. All right.
So it's really just like a shrub on a pole, more or less.
Okay.
So the hydrangea paniculata, and there are lots of popular choices now. There's one called strawberry vanilla, where it starts out. They often start out white, and then they turn pink.
Okay.
So some turn faster than others.
Right. Just let me just throw one thing in here. I had one that had different color flowers on it. A hydrangea. It had pink and blue.
Oh, wow.
Is that possible?
That could be the reblooming variety, which is endless summer, is one choice.
Oh, okay. So it is possible. I thought it had something special. But okay.
There's been a whole modulation. It's almost like a tie-dye effect.
Oh, okay. Okay, so go on. I'm sorry. I just wanted to throw that in. So you have the new wood. And how do you differentiate, again, that I know that it's the new wood and not the old wood? It blooms at a different time?
Well, let's see. The new wood varieties are more like a woody shrub.
Okay.
So like a viburnum, or not everyone knows a viburnum. It's more like it's the large leaf hydrangea. In the winter looks like very sort of frail twigs.
Okay.
Where the new wood varieties, which would be the hydrangea paniculata, that looks more like a shrub or a tree in the winter.
Okay.
They're still solid branches.
Okay. So the other one is floppy kind of.
Right. In the winter, there's not a whole lot there.
Okay. So would you cut all the way down to the bottom on that one?
No, there are some landscape professionals that do that, and then you might get no flowers, which is often done. Where it's cut to the ground, that's not a good way to go.
That's not a good way to do it.
Right.
So
the new wood variety, like one approach, I like to leave the flowers in the winter. There's still some interest.
Okay.
You could bring them inside as a dried flower.
Right.
And so the flowers, which would be the limelight variety or strawberry vanilla, one of these.
Right.
The flowers will persist through the winter.
Oh, okay.
And so it's quite a pretty antique sort of blondish brown.
Right. And take them out and put them in a dried out. Right.
And so that type of plant responds to pruning well. And so wherever you prune it back to, if there's one branch where you prune it back to, it will generally put out more than one bud.
Oh,
so when you're pruning, you have to think let's say you want it, it's going to on the corner of the house, and you want it to be 6, 7 feet tall.
Right.
It's like a mature plant, so you'd prune it back, knowing that it's going to grow 1, 2, 3 feet in that season. So you might prune it to 4 feet.
Okay.
With the idea, so if you,
And when are you doing this?
and so that you could do in the spring.
Oh, you do that early spring then? Like
Early spring is good.
early spring?
Like right this moment in April, the new wood variety, the buds are starting to come out.
Okay.
So that varies. It could be sometime in March. It's generally April.
So if I had pruned it in the beginning of March, the buds would still come out?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. But the new wood one, if I did that, I would have lost the buds. Well, my fixed cruising never get older with new wood. The one that blooms in the spring, that the flower is budding in the summer, that one I can prune in the spring, but I lose the flower.
Right.
But the other one, if okay.
Like the new wood one, that you never really lose the flowers.
Okay.
You can, so pruning it in the spring, wherever you prune it back to, it's going to put out new buds there. So the buds are almost like in a bank account, and wherever you prune it back to, those buds are going to come out.
Okay.
The other ones, that money's sort of hanging on the tree.
Right.
And if you prune it, then that money or those flowers are gone.
It's a great analogy. Yeah, the money on the tree. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and you mentioned the boxwoods, and I know on your website you have a whole thing about boxwoods. So can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think one of the important things you talk about is the idea that people make balls.
Right. It's often like what's called a header cut, which is, you think of like being beheaded.
Yeah, okay.
So a header cut can be done with power trimmers or hand trimmers. So that's when you're just cutting the outside of the plant.
Right.
So there's a time for that, but if you do that over time, in the landscape business we call it like hedge trimmer disease.
Okay.
So you're only cutting the outside.
Right.
Then the inside of the plant, it's putting all its energy at the tip of that where it's being cut.
Okay.
Just like the hydrangea.
Okay.
So over time, the inside, there's no air circulation, there's no light.
Right.
So it's more likely to get disease.
Right.
And then if there's let's say like we have lots of snowstorms here in New York, there's a snowstorm and it loses a big branch, there's a gaping hole and there's no growth on the inside.
Right. Right.
So over time, the box will lose its vigor. Because
Okay.
every time it puts out growth, it gets cut off.
Okay. So now I do not happen to like those balls. So I like that wild look on my boxwoods. And so how do I know when to prune that back? Or
So that's a very good question. So you can, I think the U.S. National Arboretum also has a tutorial on boxwood pruning that's quite good.
okay.
And there's the American Boxwood Society. They also have there's a handbook and a newsletter. So with the boxwood, if you're going to prune it, if you're going to prune a shape, ideally, or loose, either way, you're going to make what interior cuts, which could be called renovation pruning.
Okay.
Where if the plant is, let's say it's as big as this table, which a mature American boxwood would get about this big.
Right.
So you would part the boxwood, you'd reach inside, and so you might see some growth on the inside, and
But cutting it back would make more growth?
right. So you would prune. You would grab an area which is particularly dense, so like the side which has more sunlight. Maybe that's if it's against a house, the side that's to the street. So you could reach in and prune some of that growth.
Okay.
And so what I do when I do that, I grab the growth and then imagine if it wasn't there, if it would still be full.
Okay.
So you can pull it aside, and then so by doing that, then you're letting there's air and light is getting inside.
Right.
And if you prune it back, let's say 12 inches, a foot, if it's a very big plant, maybe even more, maybe 18 inches, where you prune it, so now there's going to be a stump inside,
Right.
and where that is, new growth is going to emerge.
So we'll do that branching again?
Right.
Or
So, so then you are regenerating the growth. So there's
Okay.
not just growth on the outside. And then by doing that, you can leave most of the growth on the outside. So
Right.
instead of the plant having, if you're using hedge trimmers, it might have thousands, you're making thousands of little cuts. So the plant is going to be stressed. And
Yeah.
so by doing the renovation pruning, you can stand back and just make some selective snips and do some interior thinning.
Okay, and I think on your website you mentioned that you should do that in the winter?
You can do that. You could do it in the late or the early spring before the renovation pruning is going to stimulate growth.
Okay.
So ideally you want to do it when the boxwood is out of danger of the winter of really hard frosts. So if you did it in, like in this climate, in March about.
Okay. So what happens though if you're away in March and you want to do it any other time, the middle of summer? Are you really hurting the plant by doing that?
Yeah, boxwood you generally don't want to, if it's probably true of most plants, if it's above 80 degrees, it's better not to prune.
Oh, interesting.
So some plants like a privet hedge that are really indestructible.
Okay.
So it's still not a good idea, but there's some plants which could handle it.
Indestructible.
I wouldn't suggest it, but
okay.
But a boxwood,
you could hurt it.
Right, by pruning it, the plant's being stressed, so you want to do it. So if you do it before it starts to grow, that's ideal, because then there's no energy loss. It's like it has that bank of energy in its roots, which is like a type of starch.
Right.
So it's saving that to grow, and so by pruning in March, then when it does start to grow, there's not redundancy. All the energy is going where it's needed.
I got
you're
it.
You're not pruning it off.
Yeah. When you say stress, then can you recognize a plant in stress?
Yeah, you certainly can. If the leaves are discolored, so if the leaves are, let's say, yellow.
Would you cut them off? You'd cut them off or leave them be?
If the leaves are, generally, if the plant is stressed, you don't want to prune it.
Oh, okay.
So
interesting.
It could be an environmental. It might be too dry or too wet, too windy.
So let him rest in bed a little while if he's stressed.
Stay home from school.
Give him
some chicken
Send him
soup.
to the psychiatrist if he's stressed.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay.
So when a plant gets sick, it's often a sign of multiple things being wrong. So like if there are insects, like the boxwood, there's a leaf miner, so it's little insects which suck the juice from the leaf. So if a plant is a victim of an insect or another disease, it's a sign that it's already stressed. And so it's sort of like a person when you're...
So let it work its way out? Don't let it take care of itself?
Well, for boxwood or other plants, there are systemic insecticides.
Oh, okay.
And so those work...
Well, this is a perfect reason to call a certified arborist.
That's right, they could diagnose it.
To diagnose it and figure out what's going on.
Because it's complicated, and it's not...
It is, yeah.
So you might treat it thinking you're helping it, and it could be hurting it.
Oh, wow.
And so there's lots of misnomers that that feeding plants is giving it fertilizer, which is not. Fertilizer is not food. It's like the food is really from the sunlight.
Interesting.
So if the plant is stressed, you don't want to. So fertilizing it would be like putting a sick person on a treadmill. Be the last thing.
Oh,
so fertilizing the plant is going to jump to attention and start to grow. So if it's stressed or sick, you want to just more or less leave it.
Oh, interesting. Because I think for years people were always put Miracle-Gro on it, and I don't want to use Miracle-Gro anymore because I'm trying to go organic.
Right, which is definitely the best approach.
Yeah.
Is when plants are over-fertilized, like imagine somebody pumped up on steroids. So when the plants are over-fertilized, they grow excessively.
Right. And
then they're more likely, they're more attractive to insects and to other pests.
Well, I tell you a personal story. I had a patch of grass that Miracle-Gro fell on years ago, and it came up. It was gorgeous, and I called an organic person. I would have called you, but I didn't know. And I said, I want you to do that organically. He said, that's impossible. And as I watched that piece, it just got sicker and sicker and sicker until eventually it was all browned out. And I guess it was using up all of that and just... Like you say, it was
right. And the heart starts. It's like like getting a shot of adrenaline. Your heart it just would almost. Yeah. In the short term, it's good, but it's not sustainable. So that's really true with lawns. So that's one approach I try to take is to educate, whether I'm speaking to a garden club or a new customer. It's often shifting people's perception of what's beautiful.
Right.
There's a broad range of what's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's not just a golf course, green lawn.
And I think it's time too. I mean, I think we're used to instantaneous satisfaction, and you can't do that with nature.
Right.
And also, you can't rule nature. Every time I put something over there, it goes over there.
Right. It's like going with the flow. It's, you know,
Exactly.
if a plant starts to grow here, the plant's like, it's volunteering. We call those
Right.
volunteers.
Right.
So there's a way to have a garden. It can still be managed,
Yeah.
but to have less inputs, less chemicals. There's
Right.
plants that love it, like irises might love to be in a hot, dry condition.
They do?
Or a catmint, a nepida, or a lavender.
Okay.
So if you have a bony, dry place where nothing wants to grow, there's a plant that would love that.
Yes. So that's why my first question is, you know that.
Right.
Right.
And so some people, there's lots of great graduates of the, I mean, like I went to the ESF, which is the forestry school at Syracuse.
Okay.
So that's a great school. Cornell in the region. Then the New York Botanic Garden, great garden design program.
Right.
So there's people through the different organizations, through the American Society of Landscape Architects, that website, you could find someone in your area.
Right.
And then the APLD, which is another garden design.
Right.
So there's, I think that's the key, and there's somebody for every budget too.
Okay. All right.
There's, you know, for a very large estate, to a nice house in the suburbs, to a townhouse. Maybe you want planters, or
Right.
so there's. I think that's the key. Really, is getting good information to everybody, and then they can make their own decision.
Right.
Is the key.
I just want to, one more thing about roses, because I think, well, we have a signature knockout rose is our flower for the town of Pleasantville.
Oh, beautiful.
And we'll be having a plant sale. We do every year the day before Mother's Day, and we have a lot of those. And I have it in one sunny spot in my yard, but people have told me that can grow to 4 feet, and it's big. And what do you do with it? And can you control a rose, or?
I think that goes back to the right plant in the right place.
Okay.
So the knockout rose, if it's in full sun, I remember when I was living in Syracuse, there was a public garden that was ringed by roses, and they were maybe like 7 feet tall. So,
But there are different. I don't want to say let's talk about every rose, but I'm sure that every rose has a different story. Am I right?
right. So the knockout rose, it's quite vigorous. So it's like when they first came out with the Labradoodle. It was supposed to be, you know, like 60 pounds, and then really like 100 pounds. So the knockout rose, it's a little like that. It really is. It's not a small shrub. It's really quite a large shrub rose.
Yeah.
So, you know, ideal size for that's probably more like 5 feet.
Okay.
And that's like with pruning.
Okay.
Then there's the drift rose.
Okay.
So that's like that's also a series, like a marketed series, the drift. So that's really maybe more appropriate size. So the
Okay,
drift
for
rose
something
is
small.
like 2 to 3 feet tall.
Okay. Interesting.
So the knockout is really quite big.
Okay.
If you think of a suburban house.
I wonder if we knew that when we decided that was our signature. I don't know. I don't think I made that meeting. I'm not sure. But it's a beautiful. I'm glad we did. And ours is red.
And I use it a lot because, like, for a pool area or somewhere people where they want something low maintenance.
Right.
It's pest resistant.
Right, and it comes in different colors. Oh, it's pest resistant? It's not deer resistant.
Not deer resistant.
Well, I know that for sure.
If you call it deer a pest.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, one thing I learned when I was doing research for this was that the different instruments, the different cutters make a difference too.
Oh, right.
And there's something, an anvil cutter, and then the one, what's the name of
The bypass pruner.
the bypass pruner. As that's important, isn't it? When you
Right. I like having the right tool.
Right.
I'm a tool enthusiast, you might say, or somebody who's like, I have a tool problem. So having the right tool is so important.
Yeah.
There's a man who has an arborist role at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, Chris Roddick. And so I remember I took a class with him one time, and he said, "When's the best time to prune?" And he said, "When your tools are sharp."
Okay.
So that means any time. So the anvil pruner, so that's like there's a flat plate like an anvil, and then there's a blade which comes down on like a guillotine.
Okay.
So that, I don't think I have one of those. So that generally, it's not the...
You don't even have one?
Right, it's not the greatest. Because that's taking, it's one side sharp and one's blunt.
Oh, okay.
And so it's taking something that's woody, that's pretty hard, and it's cutting it, and then whatever it doesn't cut, it somewhat smushes.
Okay.
With a bypass pruner, you have one blade that's very sharp, and then there's the bottom of the pruner, and so the bypass blade is going past that, and so instead of smushing it at the end, it's cutting it.
It's cutting it. Okay.
So the anvil pruner, you have more leverage, but the bypass pruner is a cleaner cut.
Okay. And do you think that's important, the clean cut?
That makes a huge...
Is that stressing the plant again if you smush it?
Right, you don't want to hurt the plant's feelings, right? You got to be so careful today.
Hey, there's a theory about that. Talk to your plants. Come on.
Right. So having the right pruner, so again, like you want to prune to the branch collar,
right,
and a clean cut,
right,
so you don't want to rip it,
right,
and then the plant can heal.
Okay.
So if it's ripped or if it's smushed, then it's going to take longer to heal,
okay,
and then so disease and insects can get in.
Again.
So if it's too big to make a cut with a bypass pruner, so there are loppers in that fashion, which you could cut probably up to maybe 1.5 inches. And
the big things that go like
right,
that.
We have to really, it's
right,
like you're
right,
getting a workout like at the gym.
Right.
And then there's hand pruners, so that would be for something smaller.
Well, that's the bypass again of the
Right.
hand pruners. You
Right,
would
so-
recommend those.
So
right,
both of those
right,
are bypass.
right.
If it's too big, then you ought to use like a saw.
Oh, this is a bypass too?
Right.
Okay.
There are loppers that are a bypass
Loppers
too.
are bypasses?
Right. And there are some that are not, but
Okay.
the bypass
You
are
have to
definitely
look, but
better.
make sure they're sharp.
Right. Now another key thing, like there's all kinds of plant diseases. The nursery industry keeps growing, so the chance of disease, I think it increases because this very large industrial production of plants. So at one of my seminars, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when the boxwood blight first was known, like
right.
it started in North Carolina, they explained to use Lysol. So you have a can of spray Lysol, and so I have that. So
To put on your tools.
On the tools.
Yeah, or alcohol too.
Yeah.
I use a little rubbing alcohol.
I think that's
good.
I
right?
think that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they suggested Lysol, the alcohol. I just saw a program on that, and there's something that the alcohol. I forget what it doesn't get everything.
Oh, okay. The Lysol gets it all.
Right.
All right. Good advertising.
Or you could burn. There was this one program where the person put alcohol and then they burned what remained because it doesn't get.
Okay.
Which it sounds a little extreme, but if you're pruning, if you're at a public garden or a very large estate,
oh sure,
and
you
one
don't want
plant
to
is sick,
yeah.
it could spread it, to hundreds of plants.
Wow, I think we'll have to stop here now, Charles. Thank you so much. This
My
has
pleasure.
been so interesting. You obviously are a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate your coming.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, Gigi.
And thank you for watching.